In a moment, you're going to meet a friend of mine, Jack Wheelihan, otherwise known as Hot Water on the OGR Railroading Forum. Jack is a steam locomotive guy, but he worked for the electromotive division of General Motors, otherwise known as EMD, for almost 37 years. And he's also been the regular fireman on Southern Pacific Daylight 4449 for over 30 years. Jack had a very interesting job at EMD.
The job I had was delivering new locomotives for Electromotive at the time, and there again, as luck would have it, my very first assignment was delivering GP30s to the Norfolk and Western Railroad in July 1962.
Where did you get involved with the 12-inch to the foot scale steam engines? When did that happen?
I was moved from Roanoke, Virginia to Portsmouth, Ohio. That's where all the GP30s were being assigned to work between Williamson, Portsmouth, Portsmouth to Columbus, and Portsmouth to Cincinnati. Well, they wanted coverage on the weekends, which was fine with me because I was only about a 2-hour drive from the Buffalo Creek and Gauley Railroad in West Virginia. So I could be gone during the weekdays and go over there and get first-hand experience learning how to fire up an engine in the morning, lay fresh coal, putting the coal oil in there with waste rags and everything. They gradually taught me how to fire in the hand, the horseshoe method, and you say, well, yeah, there were only 280s, but they handled 50 to 60 empty cars upgrade 18 miles to the mine at Wyden. I still have some back pain today from 1962 and 1963, shoveling 12, 14 tons of coal a day.
That early experience on the Buffalo Creek and Gauley ultimately led to an assignment to represent EMD on the American Freedom Train. In 1976, the American Freedom Train toured the country in celebration of our country's 200th birthday. Conceived by entrepreneur Ross Rowland, the American Freedom Train was powered by 2 different steam locomotives, the Daylight in the west and Reading 484 number 2101 in the east. EMD was a sponsor of the Freedom Train, but there was one little problem.
Nobody at General Motors or EMD knew anything about a steam engine.
Pick me, huh?
Put me in, coach, I'm fresh. So the general service manager called me into the office at the time. I was manager of field engineering group for the service department. He says, well, we finally found something you can do. Well, boss, I don't know if what kind of a left-handed compliment is that?
Yeah, you have to scratch your head about that one for a minute, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So, have I been doing something wrong now? Well, they all got a big chuckle out of that.
When did you become a regular fireman on the Daylight, and how did that lead to the work you've done with the Union Pacific Steam Program over the years?
A number of times, McCormick had we come out. They were short on somebody or other and say, hey, we need you for a week or 10 days. Essentially, every trip that the 4449 did after 1977, the grand opening of the California State Railroad Museum in 1981, all of that stuff, I would go out. It was a volunteer group anymore, and sometimes the city of Portland would go through the Southern Pacific, and the president of the Southern Pacific would contact the general manager of an electromotive and say, hey, we'd like to have that guy in the service department who's got a lot of experience with this. And then I've been with the 4449 since 1976.
Well, Jack, you've obviously also taken this railroad career with both diesels and steam and translated it into a beautiful 3-rail O-gauge layout. Where did that start? How did you get interested in modeling?
As probably with most people my age, I got my first Lionel, when my dad was still alive, right after, probably late 1945, the little slope-back tender switcher and a couple of cars, and the track expanded, and pretty soon Christmas was over and the railroad was still on the floor and things like that. Well, as I got older and I got more interested and aware of scale, I changed to HO, and I traded what few Lionel toy train pieces I had for HO, and I modeled an HO, oh boy, probably up until the early 1990s. I then became aware of the 3-rail stuff. One of the fellows in engineering said, I know you support the HO, Hobby, all kind of manufacturers. There's this outfit, Mike's Train House, and they keep having problems with their sound. They don't get the right sound in the right diesel. One's turbo and it'll have a blower sound. And if I give you a name and phone number, can you contact this guy and try to steer him in the right direction? Well, I'd never heard of Mike's Train House, but make a long story short, I started consulting for them, and they needed sounds of the new EMD four-stroke engine, so I got their sound engineer into LaGrange and recorded all that. And one day I get a call from not Mike Wolf, but the guy right below him, Mark Hipp. He says, I know this is probably out of your area, but you know, you've helped us a lot with the diesel sounds and some of the drawings of different components and stuff like that. But Mike wants to make a model of the steam engine, and that wonder if you could help us with this one. It's kind of an unusual engine. I said, well, okay. What do you got in mind? He says, well, there's this engine out west. We don't really know where it's from, but it's called a Daylight. You know, and I had the same reaction through the phone. I said, really? You mean 4449? He says, yeah, that's the number of it. Mike's seen pictures of it and everything, and we want to make a model of that. Can you get us photographs of, you know, take a couple of rolls of film, go up and down the sides, up on top, you know, so we can make a die-cast model of this in the Premier line and scale. He says, well, I think we're going to be running it in 2 or 3 months. How soon do you need this? He gets real quiet on the phone. He says, what do you mean we're going to be running in the next couple of months? I said, well, I've been on the crew of the 4449 since 1976. Oh, really? So you know what I'm talking about? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I would think so.
So I shot a couple of rolls of film and sent the whole thing, and you know, one day this great big box shows up here, you know, and it's a GS4 4449 and a bunch of passenger cars and some track, and it went around the living room floor, and at that point I began to realize, hey, this is really cool stuff. As I got older, I could handle it. I could see it.
Mm-hmm. That's the problem I've had.
And so I got out of HO and eventually joined the Independent High Railers Midwest Division. And we put an addition on the upstairs of the house, and I wanted to be more scale, and I got involved with these guys that have started this 3RS movement. But I was familiar with KD couplers for being in HO and all-weathered equipment. So my buddy Jerry Zeman helped me design a track plan and a layout to fit the upstairs and still give access to my wife's window boxes. And the whole upstairs addition on the house was my wife's idea. And she says, we don't have a basement here, so if we are going to build a railroad for the grandkids, it's going to have to be upstairs. Gee, don't throw me in the briar patch, you know.
Well, let's take a little tour of the railroad, so to speak. You've got a marvelous engine service facility, roundhouse, the sanding towers. Kind of take us on a little tour of that part of the layout, that corner over there.
The theme behind the railroad, we call it the Central Connecting Railroad. And it's fictitious, based in the Midwest, where it can interchange with all the railroads, so we can have motive power that I take a liking to, New York Central, Pennsylvania, Nickel Plate, Union Pacific, Southern Pacific, Northern Pacific, you know, and primarily the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, which is the home road here. And have everything on the layout from time to time as we interchange from one to the other. The engine terminal is Terminal Services Incorporated, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Central Connecting Railroad. And the chief mechanical officer of the Central Connecting Railroad could see the handwriting on the wall during World War II that outfit over there in McCook, Illinois, as soon as the war was over, steam engines were going to be gone. He said, but in the meantime, they can't deliver that many locomotives that fast. So we're here in the Midwest, we'll put in a bigger turntable, put in a bigger coal dock, improve the sanding facilities, add more water columns, and even put in an oil column so we can fuel oil-burning steam engines. And while all of these other railroads in our area start to convert to diesels, we'll take on the contract maintenance of their big steam power. So it's nothing to find a Pennsylvania Railroad T1 in there beside a New York Central Niagara or a Mohawk and a Burlington 210-4 and a Northern Pacific A5 484. And sometimes we have to stretch the imagination to get the Southern Pacific in there, but so the time frame is early to mid-50s, where railroads are just finally completing the conversion to first-generation diesels. And we occasionally get a first-generation diesel in there, like a GP7 or so, but we get a chance to get an F3 or an FT beside a Daylight, something like that. So my good friend, late Gene Niemeyer, was a master carpenter. He helped me tremendously with the layout, the building of L-girder construction of bench work. He says, you know, we're going to have this sturdy enough so during the scenery process and track laying, we can put as many as 5 adults up on this table, for the lack of a better word, and not have any problems. Since my good buddy Niemeyer passed away, we got a couple of those Walthers, I think they call them Phoenix Oil Company kits. And this started out small, and we named it the Niemeyer Oil Company. As the oil in business got bigger and bigger, you know, we had to start getting tank cars in there to fill our trucks, and we needed more storage tanks. So the old tanks that we had from the 30s or 40s, as the business expanded into the mid-50s, we added 3 more tanks, and you can see the front-end crawler over there who's building a new berm. Well, then we also realized we needed to fence the whole property because keep the kids out, and as the rural area started to expand in the town, why we figured it'd be safe. So that's Brennan's chain link fence kit that I spent a couple of weeks building on the dining room table, soldering and spray painting the silver in the garage because it was wintertime. The wiring of it I did all myself, getting old and stiff and everything, but you know, it became a real chore under the layout. And of course, at that time, Jake, the grandson, and there was a picture that my wife took that was published in OGR, this one right there, where I could solder connections on the end of the wires, and Jake, without even banging his head, could go to the other end of the layout and run it through the holes in the cross supports to where the terminal block was. So Jake helped me do a lot of wiring because he's a small little guy anyway, but he was able to literally run around under the layout and run wires for me. 3 big things that I wanted for the layout. Number one, obviously, the center of attention when you come upstairs, what you're going to see first is the big steam engine terminal. I also wanted a large icing platform. So that's a Berkshire Valley kit. One of the guys in our high railers group took it upon himself. He says, oh, that thing's really cool. How long can we make it? So I measured the space. I said, well, you want to go 6 feet? He says, ooh, boy, that'll be fun. So over a couple of years, he put that thing together, all individual boards. And the third thing I wanted over in that area was a traditional water tower, water tank, where the steam engine terminal has got the 2 water towers, but they all fill through spouts over on the servicing platform area. But I wanted a standard old water tank. And the only one that I liked the looks of was the Corber water tank. That came out quite nice. It's big, and it's scale, and it's the wood solid base and everything, so that got incorporated over there by the station. From the icing platform, it's got its own separate track in the yard, and I believe there's 4 tracks in the yard, but then past that, in the distance, up against the wall, I refer to that as the rural area. We've got a silo, a grain elevator, and a feed store. The silo is a Corber. The grain elevator is that old Lionel plastic kit. And the feed store is the Walther's Cornerstone series.
Jack's O-gauge railroad isn't the largest we've ever seen, but his approach to the operation of trains on his layout is what makes it special. He runs his trains like the real thing, with appropriate whistle signals and running speeds. And he makes it believable with logical and realistic stories about every train that runs the main line. For example, here's Nickel Plate 765 getting ready to head east with a manifest train. She's been turned, coaled, watered, and serviced. She's coming off the ready track, headed for the departure yard, where she'll couple to her train. The 765 is unusually dirty. That's because she was the second engine in a double header with 779 westbound from Bellevue to Chicago. Things are really busy today, and the terminal services crew didn't have time to wash the 765 before she had to be dispatched eastbound on this hot train. Once coupled to the train and ready to go, the 765 engineer whistles off and heads for the main. Seven 765's got a big train today. There are 9 cars of perishables on the head end, followed by 19 reefers and 5 empties on the rear for a total of 33 cars. Jack has room to run long trains like this, and he enjoys seeing them snake through the crossovers and around the broad curves on the main line.